My name is Erin Pekin. I am a career coach and career counselor with 8 years experience. And I was invited tonight by the MAPS program to discuss effective interviewing. So today we're going to talk about elements of a successful interview, the various types of interviews that you may come across, common interview questions, and how to answer them and how to follow up. So, most people here today have a preconceived notion of what a job interview is, but an interview is a conversation between the interviewer and the candidate for both parties to learn more about each other for the purpose of identifying a potential employment fit. So you each have a need. And that's why I wanted to bring in that formal definition, because I think it's really important for people to remember that this opportunity isn't just about you being interviewed. It's about you learning about the company and more about the position and the people you would work with and determining if it is a job that you really want to pursue. So what are the common interview types? When people think of an interview, they often think about two people in business wear sitting across from each other at a table. But that is rarely what a job interview looks like nowadays. And I would say that, even before COVID. So of course, there's that traditional interview question where traditional interview situation where you are asking, oh my goodness, you are answering questions from one or sometimes a couple of people. And that's pretty normal too, and something that sometimes people don't expect, that especially in large organizations, corporations, it's very normal to be interviewed by a panel of people. And part of that reason is to take any potential bias out of the interview process, and by having more than one person assess the interviewee, that kind of takes any of that bias or suspected bias out. So it's something that employers do to protect themselves, essentially. So that's the traditional type of interview, but there is also phone interviews, of course, video calls, Zoom interviews, interviewing over the internet, however you want to call it, something that we all have a lot of experience with in one way or another. Pre-recorded videos or audio interviews. This can often be a pre-screening tool, especially when you are asked to record yourself answering several questions. I know there is one major healthcare insurance company in Louisville that uses pre-recorded audio questions as a big part of their screening, at least for some positions. Sometimes you may have a panel interview, and instead of the people interviewing you being a panel interview generally means that it is you and several candidates. This is something that's really not as in fashion anymore. You do see it in grad school sometimes, or sometimes for more entry-level employment. And then also at an interview, you may have a lunch, and that is really a lunch or a meal, and that's really considered usually part of the interview process. You may be asked to do a presentation. For technical jobs too, you may be asked to do assessments. You may be asked to do tests and skill-based tests. And I'm not really counting that as part of an interview, but that's really considered more just part of the application process. So let's talk about how to do well at your job interview, because your job interview is what gets you the job. Networking gets someone to look at your resume. Your resume is what gets you an interview, and the interview is really what gets you the job. So even though good and bad interviewing is obviously subjective, If you have a bad interview, you know, that position may not be for you. If you are not answering the questions and giving them the information they need, you might not be looked at as the right fit for the position. So what do you need to do? Plan and prepare. That is my biggest part. The prep work of the interview is really the most important part. Of course, body language and image, questions and answers, what most people think of an interview, that main meat of the interview, and then following up post-interview. So planning and preparing, just real quickly, you know, it is important to know the logistics of the interview. You want to come across as someone that is dependable and reliable. So if you are late to the interview, if you call several times on the way to the interview because you're lost, you know, that's not showing a lot of pre-planning. So make sure you know the logistics. Sometimes we get so excited when we get called for an interview, we forget the little details like who we are interviewing with, what is their name, what is their title. And I've definitely done that too. But that's going to give you a lot more confidence walking in the door and saying, I'm here to interview with Bob Jones, than saying, I have an interview today. So make sure you know those details. And for a virtual interview, make sure that you have the link or the login platform to access the web portal. And I would definitely test it out if you can. Make sure your camera works, make sure your microphone works. Make sure that you have a quiet place to interview. Also good for a phone also important for a phone interview. Remove distractions as much as possible. You know, if you can not have your kids at home, if you cannot have your pets in the room, that is mostly helpful for you, but then there can also be some bias issues. I actually had someone on a hiring committee recently was extremely distracted by someone's cat walking around, which for me, that wouldn't matter or be very important. But for other people, that may show that the person doesn't have the level of professionalism that they're looking for. So what to bring to an interview, you know, it's good to have a professional bag, maybe a pad folio, or even just a plain folder without a lot of writing on it. Even though we live in a very digital world, if you're meeting in person, it definitely doesn't hurt to have a few copies of your references and a few copies of your resume. And if you are in a field where you may have some sort of portfolio or artifacts, it doesn't hurt to bring those along too. And a big one, turn off your phone. Even if it's a virtual interview, make sure your phone is on silent. If you are on a phone interview, you're probably on your cell phone. Make sure that's charged. Make sure your computer is plugged in. I only say these things because I've heard before that people have had problems with them. So this is the big part about preparing for your interview. Come to your interview knowing your thesis or your brand. Why should they hire you? And since I work with a lot of more traditional college-age students, I often use the term thesis. But basically, it's that answer to why are you the good candidate? What skills and experiences do you have that relate? Prepare some examples to illustrate those skills. So it can make you really stand out as a candidate just because they say, tell me about your biggest strengths. You know, to some they may say, oh, well, I'm really organized. I'm great at written and oral communication. So technically you're answering the question. They said, what are your biggest strengths? You answered. But to really make you stand out as an interviewee is to give some examples. Just because they don't ask for an example doesn't mean you shouldn't give one, you know, because also you want to, well, I guess you are telling because it's an interview, but as much as you want to show, not tell. So if you say your biggest strength is being organized, give an example. I pride myself at being a really organized person. In my last job, we were tasked with reorganizing all of the files, and this is how I did that task. You know, that is something that makes you stand out and makes it seem like you are a person they can trust when you say that you are those things. It adds a level of trust. What can you do for the company? This is a big one. So when you are looking at that job description, you know, what do they need? Everyone is hiring a position because they have a need. There is something that needs to be fulfilled. That's why the job is open. How can you do that? Think about, do some research on that company, you know, and figure out like what problems are they having in the general position. What challenges does someone have at being their best at their job in that position? And what are you going to bring to those challenges that makes you the best candidate? So when I was interviewing to work at a university career center, I had done some research and read some trade publications on higher ed. And I knew one of the biggest issues in a career center was getting students involved in programming. So I had prepared answers to how I would help that issue. I had practiced how I could talk about previous experiences that relate to engaging clients. Even though I hadn't worked in higher ed and I hadn't worked in college students, I could talk about how I engaged career clients looking for career services and how that relates to a college career center. So by doing that digging and getting that research and information about, you know, what are some of the needs, I came in knowing what they wanted. And that is part of my brand, that one of my biggest things is that I can get people involved and get people excited about using career services, about seeing this as something that's going to be of value to them. And that's how I'm of value to the organization, I like to think. So it is really about that thesis, and that is what's going to answer your questions. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. And so also important to prepare is what questions you have about them, because that is almost always the end of the interview. What questions do you have for us? Also, to determine that good fit, you really need to come in thinking, you know, what do you need to know to make sure that this is a job that you want? And of course, sometimes there's questions you can't ask at an interview, but consider what questions are appropriate at an interview to ask, and how you could ask things that you may get that information that you want. So, you know, you can't be like, oh, are you a good boss? Because everyone's going to say yes. You know, even when you say things like, well, what would employees say about working here? No one's going to say, you know, we expect our employees to work over 40 hours and everyone's really unhappy about it. That's not an answer you're going to hear at an interview. But when you ask about how they value work-life balance, you know, you may get an answer, even if they say it in a positive way, that can help you understand how the company views that subject, if that's what's most important to you. So body language and image. It's hard to even talk about this and not be a little self-conscious. You want to come into an interview with good posture, project confidence, have your shoulders back, maintain eye contact. This is important even in an online interview. You know, a lot of times people will ask me, if I'm being interviewed by several people, who do I look at? You know, I think you can kind of look towards the middle if you're not clear to who is asking you the question. I think for the most part, if people are taking turns asking a question, you should look at the person who's talking to you. But then also, you know, be aware to like glance around at people. Maybe you nod your head a little bit, make eye contact. Nod your head to indicate understanding and agreement. Personal grooming. I'm not going to spend a lot of time about what to wear for an interview because that could be its own workshop. But I'm going to go over some big parts, where the personal grooming part is a part that people are maybe more likely to miss. Make sure you don't necessarily need to go spend hundreds of dollars on a haircut and a manicure, but make sure things are neat. Your fingernails are neat. If you have facial hair, your facial hair is neat. Avoid heavy scents and cologne. With interview attire, it is better to dress more formal for the position. If you are not sure, go more formal. Neutral colors, just for, this is not gender specific, clothes should not be form-fitting. So you should not wear form-fitting pants. I've especially always heard feedback from hiring managers in the last few years about people like essentially wearing leggings to a job interview. That's not really appropriate, even if you think they're pants and not leggings. So nothing form-fitting, because really think about those 3 Fs: the fit, the fabric. Is it something that's comfortable to you? And that feel, because that's another big part, is that it's something that you feel confident in. If you are not a person who wears a suit very often, try to find one that feels really comfortable, and also spend some time in it before the interview. Wearing a large suit jacket can feel very restricting for men or women. So if you're not a person that has spent a lot of time wearing a suit jacket, wear it. If you're a person who doesn't wear high heels, don't wear high heels to your job interview. That's going to make you uncomfortable. So really try to go in what you're going to feel most confident in while being professional, and just sticking more neutral, because you want them to judge you for your answers and not for what you're wearing. Let's get to the meat of it, what people really care about. Let's talk about job interview questions. And I did not make this announcement when we started. If you have any questions along the way, feel free to put them in the chat. I might answer them now. I might answer them when we get to that topic, or at the end of the presentation. But if you have a question or a comment, feel free to drop it in the chat. So let's get to the meat of an interview: questions and answers. So there are 3 types of interview questions: the traditional, which are overview questions, what we think of when we think of an interview; situational questions; and behavioral. In reality, though, there are 3 true types of interview questions. Can you do the job? They're asking questions about your strengths, your skills, your abilities. They want to hear those stories to confirm that you actually have those skills. They want to hear qualitative and quantitative information that demonstrate that you have those skills. So that might be referencing your GPA or your typing speed. What the next true type of question is: will you like the job and remain in the position for a period of time? So an employer generally wants to hire someone who's going to be there for a while. Especially right now with turnover being very high, that is something that they're really looking for. So what motivates you? What interests you? A bad fit, this is really about fit. Skill wise, if you are overqualified for a job, that means you might be bored and distract other people or cause other problems in the workplace. And can we tolerate working with you? Cultural fit. Are you going to work out with this team? And that part can be hard. There can be some unconscious bias in that area. And it can be something that is really hard to quantify. But we all know that we're being looked at as, are you going to fit in with this team? What are we looking for in the type of person that has this job? traditional interview questions. So these are the questions that we think of when we think of interview questions. Tell me about yourself. Why are you interested in this career field? Why are you interested in this company? What are your goals? What are your greatest strengths? And of course, everyone's least favorite interview question, what is your greatest weakness? Why should we hire you? What questions do you have for us? You know, these are the kind of questions that will fill a good portion of most job interviews. And it's also kind of like the interview questions that we had when we were in high school and, you know, applying for our first job. So something that if you have had a job before, you're probably have some experience with these questions. You may not have loved how you answered them, but you are used to these types of questions. And I just said that everyone's least favorite question is, tell me about your greatest weakness. And that is a lie, because everyone's least favorite question is, tell me about yourself. So, you know, I would put money on it. Almost 100% of the time you come into a job interview, they introduce themselves, they may tell you, you know, they may go into a little more detail about their positions or the job itself. But then when it gets to the interview, the first thing they say almost all the time is, so tell us a little bit about yourself. And even myself, even though I know how to answer that question, it is the question I want to prepare for the least. So what information are they seeking when they ask that question? You know, a lot of times people assume they want your life story. They want to know everything about you. Oh God, or maybe they don't want to know everything about you. And that's what makes it extra stressful. But for the most part, when that question is asked, they're not asking about your whole life. They're not asking about your personal life. They really want to know about you professionally. So that takes some of the pressure off. And then also, it's really a question to break the ice. Not that it's not important. It's very important. But it is just a way to get the ball rolling. And to me, knowing that takes some of the pressure off. But it is also really important to answer that question with as much confidence as you can, because that is the first question that you answer. So if you can answer that question confidently, feeling like, oh, I nailed that, then the rest of the interview is going to be so much smoother for you, so much easier. You know, when the very first thing they ask, and you're like, oh, shoot, okay. You know, and you just start talking, that's not a good place to start the interview from. So there is a quick formula for how to answer this question. The present. Talk a little bit about what your current role is, what you're doing now. That might be that you recently graduated. It might be, well, I've worked in retail management for 10 years, but I have I became interested in pivoting my career. So I did some research and I thought cybersecurity would be a really good fit for me. So I recently completed a cybersecurity program through MAPS, through U of L, and I thought this was a good field for me. Now you're going to talk a little bit about the past. So you're talking about the future, you're going to talk a little bit about the past. I thought this would be a good field for me because in my role in retail management, I always feel very comfortable utilizing different technology. I'm always the person that people came to with technology issues. And when I was in my original undergraduate degree, I did really good in my computer classes. And then you want to segue into the future. So in the future, I'm really excited to finally get involved in the field and get my first position in the field. And I think my extensive background in leadership and as a team player and having strong communication skills that can be of value to any workplace, with additionally my skills that I have developed recently through earning this and that cybersecurity certification would make me an excellent candidate for this role. So this is something, you know, you can't memorize every question to a job interview. Every possible question, you cannot have a memorized possible answer. But this is the one thing that I really suggest that you work on, you write down, you say to yourself in the shower, when you're driving, to your friend, to your spouse, and make it something, even if it's not following this exact formula, that it's something that you feels very authentic to you and really comfortable to you. Because again, it's all about starting that interview from a place of power, from a place of like, yes, I have this, I'm in control. That's what's going to make this situation more comfortable for you. And also, once you have this tell me about yourself formula, this is something when you're networking, you can use when, you know, some people call it the elevator pitch. If you meet someone who's in this field, well, what are you going to tell them about yourself? So this is just a really good thing to have in your pocket. And there will be some links that have this formula and some more information at the end of the PowerPoint too. So behavioral interview questions. This is a big deal. So anyone who's been to a job interview has probably gotten a question that said, tell me about a time, describe a circumstance, tell me how you approached the situation. You know, I think some of the most common questions are, tell me about a time you had to deal with a difficult customer. Tell me about a time you had to, you had multiple responsibilities, and how did you manage those different responsibilities? You know, those two are two big ones that you'll get a lot. So this type of question is looking for a story. And this can also help you, you know, I mentioned situational questions, which are very similar. How would you handle this situation? And they're really answered in the same format, which is they want to hear that story, but they also want you to walk through what you did. That is the more important part. And the way to answer that is using the STAR method. And this isn't just, you know, something that career coaches give out to help you answer that question to make it easier for you, but a lot of hiring managers, HR people are actually looking that you hit all 4 parts of the STAR method. You know, some interviews, especially again with big organizations, large companies, they'll have a rubric, a scoring rubric for an interview. And sometimes hitting all 4 parts of the STAR are part of that rubric. So this is another thing where like really memorize and be comfortable with it. So when you're asked one of those behavioral questions, you want to set up the situation, set up the background and the context. Task, what is required of you? The action, what actions did you take? And most importantly, the results of your actions. So if you're asked about dealing with a difficult customer and you say, this woman came in, she was very mad because her online order was wrong and she took it home and ate half of it. And then she came in and said that, you know, she didn't get something. The task, what are you required to do? You're required to be the person to deal with it, probably in that situation, to handle her. What actions did you take? And then if you just give no result, that there's no end to the story. You know, when they say, tell me about a time you had to deal with a difficult customer, they don't want to hear, oh yeah, once I had a lady come in and she was angry. They want to hear all 4 parts of that story. So how can you have an answer ready for every question? Okay, so I already kind of talked about this a little bit, but I'm going to reiterate because I think it is the most important part of really being comfortable interviewing. And that is by knowing what value you have to that company. You cannot have an answer to every question, but if you have all the reasons why you think you're a good candidate, if you are looking at that job description and you're saying, okay, they are looking for this. These are the 4 things that I've done that relate to that. You know, these are the 4 skills that I have that relate to that. If they are looking for someone who is good at outreach, well, here are the 4 skills that I have that make me good at outreach. I feel comfortable talking to people individually. I feel I have good public presentation, public speaking skills, and I feel very comfortable doing it. And I try to be fun and approachable. Hopefully you all agree. And I have experience creating social media. And not only do I have experience creating social media and running social media, but I also have data to show how I improved engagement and how that led to engagement to real life programs that brought in money. You know, when you can come in and look at it like that and not just say like, oh yeah, I've done some of that they're looking for. I know that. Oh, they're looking for this computer program. I've used that. That's good. But come in knowing, okay, this is the exact experience that I've had. Here are the projects that I did when I was learning about it. Here were the scores I received on all the assessments. So, and again, thinking about what are they really looking for? What are those things that are maybe not even written on that page that they're looking for? It might be about being a good team player. And somehow we missed this slide, but I had a slide about research. It either disappeared or I didn't talk about it, but how you get this information about, you know, what they are looking for that is unsaid. A great way to do that is have a professional network. You know, I did a presentation a couple of weeks ago about how important establishing that network is to get you job leads, to get recommended for a job. But that professional network is also there so that you can say, hey, you told me all about that position and I'm interviewing it for it. What should I know? What's the team like? What do you think they really need on their team to be successful? What type of person is the boss? Does he like jokes? Is he very formal? You know, that's going to help you come in knowing how to approach that situation. It's that insider information that really gives you an edge. And you obviously can't have that for every job that you interview for, but if you do, definitely use it. And if you don't have that information, make sure you are looking, read the company's entire webpage. Google the company. You know, use just traditional news sources, the Courier Journal, business news sources, like in Louisville, Business First. And I think it's actually a chain, so there's maybe Business First in whatever city you're in. You know, see if there's been any stories about that company. Are they expanding? That's really good information to know. If you know that they're getting into a new sector, you know, that is something that you can bring it up. You can, even if they don't ask you the question, do you have any experience, you know, joining a team that's brand new? If you've had that experience, you can bring that up. And then subconsciously they're thinking, oh, well, that's perfect because we're actually not just hiring one person, we're hiring a whole team of cybersecurity experts for this new branch. So knowing that this person has experience where they were brought in, you know, not to be trained by people who had already worked there, that could be really helpful. And then when you think about those skills again, think about those examples that illustrate those skills. So that way, when they ask you those STAR questions, you have answers prepared. You know, even with the STAR questions, you can't prepare an answer for every single possible question, situation they may throw at you. But if you have a couple stories of things that you're really proud of at work, times where, you know, maybe you overcome something, you were dealt a difficult situation, but you handled it, you can probably make that story work for any question. So don't think about, I'm going to an interview to be answered all these different questions, whatever they throw at me. Go into the interview thinking, these are the things I want them to know about me. Do a presentation for yourself, for your family, about why you're a good fit for the job. Practice that. And then the questions are just the prompts for you to give that information that you already have. And that's how you're going to go in feeling really confident and feeling like you are in charge of that interview situation. And of course, too, it's always about what you can do for the company. You know, some people have this mindset of like, well, what can I get? And that is important. And like, there's definitely room, of course, in an interview for, you know, talking about what really excites you about the company, benefit-wise, that you're really impressed that they do certain things that will benefit you. You should definitely mention that. And it, you know, it maybe shows that it also demonstrates that you've done some research on the company. You know, and anytime you can talk about programs that they do that, you know, really excite you. Oh, I think it's really cool that you do this thing, you know, where 4 times a year you go do volunteer work. That's something I really want to make time for, and I've thought about, you know, how I need to do. And I think it's really great that this company cares about the community it's in, and I would love to help with that. You know, those are the things that make you stand out being interviewed. And then wrapping it up. So when you leave an interview, remember, the interview does not leave until you are in your car. So if you're in the situation that someone's walking you out, you know, still kind of stay in interview mode. Also, as much as possible, as much as you can, you want to leave the interview with some knowledge of what's coming next. And that's pretty normal for anything that is going to be a more professional interview, that they're going to give you that information. But if they don't, it's totally appropriate to ask. Even if you've gotten past the like, what questions do you have for us phase, it's definitely okay to say, you know, while you're not leaving, walking out the door, but while things are wrapping up, it's okay to say, you know, I don't think we've gone over next steps. Is there a timeline for when I could expect to hear from you? Or what do you expect the next step to be for the interview process? Saying like that, something like that is totally appropriate, totally expected, and hopefully it would be covered by them. But if it's not, make sure you leave knowing, because that's going to give you a big peace of mind. Because there is nothing worse than going home and thinking you did a great job at an interview, and you're so excited about the job, and then just having no knowledge of what's coming next. But, you know, after you get home, after you decompress, it is time to write that thank you letter. This is really important. People really like seeing them, and very few people send them. Like, it's astonishing how few people send thank you notes after an interview. It does not have to be an actual letter. Even if you met with them in person, you know, if you're more comfortable writing an email, write an email. If you interviewed with more than one person, it is nice to write one to each individual, or at least if there's one main person, you know, say something to establish, please let the rest of the interview panel know that I appreciated their time, you know, or could you forward this message on to the rest of the interview panel? And at the end of this presentation, I will be including some links, and one of them is a great thank you note template. But, you know, you don't want to just say thank you for your time. You know, this is your last moment to like really sell it, really make sure that you are standing out as a good candidate. And this is a place to do that by maybe including or clarifying any points. So if there's something to, this happens, you know, if you get a question that is difficult, or if you just later thought like, oh man, I should have said this thing is really important, reference that in your thank you letter. Of course, you don't want to like rehash every single question, but one question, it's totally fine to say, during the interview, you asked me about this, and even though I'm satisfied with my answer, I also have this experience and I think it could be of value. The last opportunity to sell yourself. So reiterate why you are that top candidate, and why you are so excited and a good fit for the position. And again, things like this can seem really intimidating, and that is why there are great templates and resources on the internet to help you and walk you through that. So it is better to use a template. It is better to keep it short than not do it at all. So if you're just so nervous about this, if it's something you've never done, just do it. It's better to do it than not do it. And then my last point, which I'm surprised got left off of this slide, what to do if you don't know an answer. What to do if you get a question that is really difficult. So the first thing I'm going to say is it is okay to take some time to think about your answer. The silence feels much longer on your side than their side. To me, what makes it that silence feel a little bit more comfortable is saying, that is a really good question. I'm going to take a minute to think about that question and take that minute. That is better than you just starting to word vomit, which I definitely am a person who word vomits, if you can tell, and not get that great answer that you might have, or even that answer that is actually answering their question, than just starting to talk. So that is my information that I have. And to, again, Austin, great question. What are those small details that make you stand out and demonstrate that you are detail-oriented and prepared? It is really knowing that job, knowing as much as you can know about that job, company, that field, so that you can reference that little knowledge is great. That you can say, oh, I read all about how the company is doing this, or I know this is a big issue in our industry. Has this team seen that type of cyber security bug? I don't, so those little details where it demonstrates that you really went out of your way to understand what the job is, that is what really makes you stand out as a candidate. Yeah, what to do if you're very nervous before or during an interview. So I usually give this presentation like at least an hour, so I was trying to cut some things. I did cut that out, but it is really important. What to do if you're nervous. Practice as much as you can. Like I said, think about giving a presentation to the mirror, to your pet, about why you are a good candidate for the job. Answer that tell me about yourself question. Again, I don't recommend like going through every possible interview question. Some of the big ones, yes, but the more you prepare, the better you will be. Even if you are a person who generally does things on the fly, does the paper the night before, likes that last minute adrenaline, which again, I'm one of those people. The more you prepare for an interview is how you're going to feel more calm and be more prepared. That's the first tip. Second tip, I might even stand up and do. So before an interview, there is a public speaking technique that I recommend, the Superman pose. So this might be something you do in your car, kind of modified. If you get to a place early enough, I would even suggest going to the restroom. Going to the restroom before an interview could always be a good idea. That will kind of calm your nerves in case you feel like you need to, or just worrying that you will need to use the restroom. But the Superman pose has you can kind of guess. Let's see if this view. Stand like Superman. Take some big, deep breaths. Really get that heart rate down. You know, if you can feel your heart beating really fast, take some big, deep breaths. Same thing with the job interview. The silence feels longer to you than them. And again, if you are really nervous, if you haven't been in a lot of interview situations like the one you're in, you know, it's okay to say, I'm a little nervous. I'm so excited for this job. I'm just a little bit nervous. You know, that's going to feel better to you. Even practice saying it. You know, when you're practicing for an interview, if nerves or something that comes up, practice saying, I'm a little bit nervous. I'm just going to take a few breaths. It's going to make you feel better. And how do you sell yourself when you're entry level? Yeah, and this can be, that's a good question. And this can be something that can be really hard, honestly, because you sometimes have, you may have less experience than some people that you're interviewing against, but this is something you should know. If you are being interviewed, that means you have the baseline skills and experience for the job. For the most part, they are not interviewing you if they don't think that you have the general knowledge and experience to do that job. They are distinguishing the people who have those basic requirements. So when you think about it that way, one, hopefully that gives you a little bit more confidence. So if one reason you're feeling unconfident is that, you know, you maybe don't have any formal work experience in that area already, you know that you have something that's why they're bringing you in. But again, it's those, I don't want to call them little things because it's not. It's that coming in and knowing the role and knowing what the company needs and telling them that. That's how you sell yourself, you know, and you sell yourself by going above and beyond, by wearing a suit and tie to the startup, even though that's not the normal culture. You know, entry-level IT job or an entry-level hospital job may not require a full suit at a job interview, but dressing up, sending a thank you note. That is how you stand out as a candidate, especially in a more entry-level role, because, you know, kind of the higher up, they may expect that a little bit more, but they may not be expecting that. So that can make you something that makes you stand out. It demonstrates your good written communication skills that almost every job is looking for. And it demonstrates that just genuine enthusiasm for the position. And it's a place that if you are nervous, if you were, you know, pretty nervous during the interview, that thank you note is a place where you can reiterate some of those points that maybe you feel like you didn't get across as much as you could. And then tips on negotiating salary and benefits. So, you know, thankfully right now, the move is we are moving to more salary transparency, which is awesome. And I think puts everyone on a much equal playing field and makes this a lot easier. You know, I would hope by a main interview, you have knowledge of the salary. So if you have a pre-screening call, it's very appropriate if they don't ask you the salary range to ask, or to ask in an interview. Because you don't want to do all of this preparing to find out that a job pays significantly less than, you know, what you make now. That's just not in the area that you want to take a job in. So hopefully you have that knowledge before the interview. So you're kind of taking that off the plate, the interview, hopefully. So wait until, so salary negotiation should really be done after you offered the job. Like, you want to know that it's in the general range that is worth your time, and that you're not wasting the company's time too. But wait for the salary negotiation until you actually are hired. And then what you really can use for that is data from sources like Glassdoor, which can be a little bit unreliable, from ONET, knowing industry standards, you know, your experience that you've had. And it may be, even if you are new to a certain field, it may be some of those more transferable skills about having manager and leadership experience. You know, you may be hired to work in IT, but if you're going to be leading people, then that previous managerial experience that you've had is important of value. So, you know, look at as many sources as you can. And this is another place where having a network, having a mentor can really come in handy. I just can't stress it enough. And I know it can be really hard for people to establish that. But when you can ask someone, hey, what do you think about this salary range for this position, and get feedback from someone who's in that field, that's really helpful. You know, if for some reason, if you are applying for a nonprofit or a state federal government job, the good thing about that is those jobs are published on the internet. So, you know, you can have a good idea of what people at certain levels make. And then actually, you know, people will often say salary and benefit negotiation, but often with more established companies and organizations, benefit negotiation might be even harder than salary. Once I had a client who really valued time off, and so she was willing to accept a certain salary if they gave her another week of vacation. And their basic argument was like, well, literally everyone in the company gets the same vacation, but everyone has different salaries. So that would not be fair. So if that is your priorities, if there's things that are more benefit sided that are your priorities, you can definitely try. But remember, always come with what you are bringing to them, not what is fair. Well, I want to say not what is fair. But make sure that if you say a number, you have reasons for why that number is appropriate. Actually, that's what I'm going to say. Because it is important that it's fair. Because it's not just about your skills, but it's about what the general pay rate for that position in your industry and in your area is. So, you know, someone who has your job in California may not be the same. And that's something too, if you're looking for remote work, if you're based somewhere with a higher cost of living from a company that is really established in a certain area, maybe has some employees that work in an office, it may be hard for them to raise that wage where it would be if, you know, that job was in California. So something to think about if you're in states with a higher cost of living. So hopefully that answered your question. I really appreciated everyone's time tonight. There are resources on this last slide that will be put when Maps puts the video up, so you can find them there. I can tell you one of my favorite resources, and most of these are from, is called themuse.com, THEMUSE.com. That is a great resource for professional advice. They have really good templates to write emails, questions to ask. It's really one of my favorite places to go to for professional advice. So everyone, go to your interviews well prepared, take deep breaths, and you'll do great. And thank you for your time. Good night.